Hey there everybody, it's AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. Today I am going to just ramble because I'm halfway through writing a script for some of the most evil type of dragons, which is the Norse dragons or the Lenorms. But that's quite an extensive script covering all of the different varieties of Lenorms, so it's quite a major undertaking, and I've been in the process of writing that whilst also being out of town as well. So I'm away from all of my normal equipment and everything and am producing this on the fly. So today, due to a request from various people, I'm just going to talk about D&D. It's not going to be a specific video about a monster. I'm just going to cover a range of topics, including intelligent snails, riding snails, intelligent mimics, intelligent magic items, smart monsters and dumb players, encounter quests, and unique terrain types, including dimensional shifts and morphic terrain. So, first of all, the intelligent snails. This was a NPC race that I created just on the fly. The adventurers were in a sort of a fey-impinged jungle where there was a lot of different dimensional activity going on, and they encountered a plaid shirt wearing humanoid snail. Essentially, it didn't have a shell or anything. It was just it had the head of a snail, and its arms and legs were snail skin. So it was definitely, a snail. And also, the personality and metabolism of this creature was snail-like. It confirmed that its race was called the Manu, and they were interdimensional traders that dealt with whatever races they came across peaceably and hopefully profitably, trading through barter or precious metals and gems and things. The problem was that the Manu, although they were very handy for the player characters to deal with, because they had magic items and they could buy magic items and things, they could trade with healing potions and alchemical items that the Manu produced, they talked very, very slowly. And this was driving the players around the table crazy because they really needed to deal with the Manu, but every time they did, it was mind-boggling as I would slowly say everything. And it was driving the players up the wall. So what they did was they traded for various items, and one of them had a potion of haste. And so they fed a potion of haste to the Manu to increase its level of speaking. So the Manu had never really encountered a potion of haste before, or been encouraged to drink it in mass quantities just so that they could communicate quickly with these very high metabolism, fast-speaking humanoids. And unfortunately, it turns out that the potion of haste had a very addictive quality, and the Manu became hopelessly addicted to drinking potions of haste. Essentially, they were addicted to a drug which increased their metabolism and made them feel better. Yeah, so that was their crank. And it was having a horrible deleterious effect on their entire species, but the players didn't care because essentially it meant that the Manu talked faster and they thought it was hilarious. So, yeah. So that's just some idea of one of the NPC races that I would produce, is these Manu. And they were not exactly native to the Feywild. They were, I didn't really specify exactly where they came from. They could have come from Yggdrasil, which would make sense if there was large, intelligent snails living on the Viking world ash. So also the riding snails were also common in that area as well, and I produced a bunch of miniatures featuring these riding snails. Unfortunately, I didn't factor into it never occurred to me that one of the players around the table would have a bit of a phobia about snails, and unfortunately I didn't really get to use these miniatures very much because, the reaction was not the favourable one that I was hoping for. But I thought the miniatures was really cool. These were made with bits of modelling putty around a scrunched up tinfoil core with a pasta shell as the actual shell of these large riding snails, and then I just made a little platform on top that the player character miniatures could easily sit on top of as they moved across the terrain. And I thought they were really cool. And just interesting. So I gave them, basic stats for riding animals, and really there was not much difference about them, apart from the fact that in the Underdark they could travel over very rough terrain fairly easily. with their big mucusy foot thing, and also it made it very hard for the player characters to get lost because they could travel back through following the snail trail. So that was them. And intelligent mimics. It was another subject that came up when we were talking about what does a baby mimic? What is a baby? How do mimics evolve? How do they change? Is it possible that there's a life cycle to mimics that results in them becoming more intelligent over time? And I think that's reasonable. It's kind of supported in the lore in that really large mimics quite often have an intelligence to them, so that they can mimic they can take on the features of very complicated things, such as towers, for instance. In the Monsters of Nentha Vale, which was the 4th edition book supplement that included a lot of unique monsters, there was a tower that had a flock of red crows that lived on it or around it, kind of carrion crows, and this tower was in fact a gigantic ancient mimic that took on the qualities of a wizard's tower or a fort that could be encountered in the wilderness. So you could actually go inside and interact with this thing, but it was a intelligent predatory beast. So the idea is that mimics could become intelligent enough to eventually become something like a doppelganger. So if they get it in their head that they can mimic a humanoid, what if their mimicking powers are so fine-tuned that they learn that they can mimic a nervous system and a brain structure of a humanoid? So they in fact mimic intelligence to the point where all of a sudden they're intelligent. Quite a surprise to them. If you could imagine being an unintelligent ooze type creature one moment and then a nervous system equipped intelligent creature the next, it would be quite disconcerting until, of course, you encounter other intelligent mimics which take you under their wing, that being true doppelgangers. And how would this information pan out if you were playing a race of shifters or changelings, for instance? Or, other type of shape-changing creatures? What if it was a reasonably common thread? What if lycanthropy was in fact a disease that was passed on by mimics? Not a supernatural curse, but in fact a shape-changing virus that changed the flesh of the creature that it was mimicking into something else. So you could in fact become a were treasure chest or a were log. Just an idea. So that also brings us to intelligent items. Like, is it possible that intelligence is far more widespread and prevalent in the Dungeons & Dragons universe? So you have the idea that you can awaken plants and trees. That's long been a part of the lore for Lord of the Rings. The elves awakened trees to become treants, and the forest, Fangor forest, became awakened so that the trees were intelligent and got shooed away by the treant tree bed when the tree was trying to eat some hobbits. And the idea that you can awaken, use spell magic, arcane magic, to awaken chairs and tabletops and things like that. Where does that intelligence come from? That's a very complicated thing for a spell to do. So I like to think that it's made a copy of the caster's mind and it's impinged it onto that object. So in fact, in a weird sort of a way, when the casts that spell, they, from the table or chair's point of view, it's like the caster himself is now the table or chair and dealing with this really, really strange environment that it's now found itself in. Its body is now an inanimate object animated by temporary magical force. But it wants to kind of obey the thing that made it, although it might not it may not have any memories of being the caster. It may just be the intelligence of the caster, like a snapshot, a photo of it that's impinged upon that's imprinted into that inanimate object. So really the source of the intelligence for that item is the caster itself. So perhaps if the wizard dies, the animated objects die too. Or if perhaps you kill the wizard, all of a sudden the tables and chairs and things psychically linked somehow maybe to this caster gain some of the memories and intelligence of this object, of this caster, becoming something like a Harry Potter, a Voldemort, Horcrux. So essentially becoming something like a phylactery, which would be a very interesting turn-up and something that could make for an interesting campaign twist that the players probably wouldn't see coming. And also, as a DM, what is the challenge of your villain suddenly being a chair or a candlestick or some such? Interesting. Or, the same thing could be said for the more mundane magical items that have intelligence, such as swords and shields and suits of armor and things. That could definitely be the personality of the person who created the object in the first place. Or it could be some approximation of somebody else. So the caster has got enough mental gymnastics and guile to take on the personality or project the personality of somebody else into the object and make that object believe that they are in fact the soul of some other famous person, when in actual fact it's really just a simulacra, a homunculus intelligence which is imprinted upon that item by the caster themselves. So the source of intelligence could quite often be the wizards themselves, who, when you think about it, are the primary source of intelligence in the Dungeons and Dragons community. They're the great sages. They're the ones where intelligence is their major focus. So how does that intelligence play out? And when you're playing a very intelligent character, but you're not very much. I mean, I play very intelligent spellcasters, but I'm not the most intelligent person, and I certainly don't have a genius level intellect which would allow me to concentrate on multiple games of Sudoku in my head at the same time, whilst also having a conversation with somebody else, whilst also writing with one hand and juggling with the other. But that's the sort of mental gymnastics that wizards train to do, so they can concentrate on multiple things at the same time. That's how they memorize and keep in mind multiple spells at the same time. When they are casting a spell, they're completing a ritual which is going on in their head the entire day. That's the whole idea of the fire and forget magical spell. Once you fire that spell off, you no longer have to keep yourself primed with that particular point of view in your head that is completed by that ritual. When you cast the spell, use the components, use the verbal and somatic components for it. So that's something to keep in mind, and something that I think a lot of people don't really take into account. Also, dragons and things, which is on my mind at the moment, considering the script that I'm writing. Dragons don't need any physical components. All they need to do is speak words, and their very nature is magical. So they channel elemental and primal intelligence to change the environment. So that brings up the other question of intelligent monsters and dumb players. I'll talk more on intelligent items as well, such as trapped intelligences, such as elementals and things like that. So elementals have a different version of intelligence to normal creatures, because they see the world completely differently. They are energy beings which you move through physical matter and animate it as if it's their body. So essentially, they're like a possessing spirit. If you think about Stephen King's movie Christine, there is a possessing evil intelligence which is inside the metal and components of that car. So even when the car is destroyed, it regenerates itself because you haven't destroyed the spirit inside that car, which is an interesting concept, that Christine was actually an evil elemental. Let that sink in for a while and give you some idea of what an intelligent magical item could be like if it's running amok and it's evil and it's out of control. What if, the sword could fly off on its own and start killing people? How do you stop it? How do you destroy a magical sword? Do you have to smelt it down? So, it's like the hobbits taking the One Ring to the Mount Doom and throwing it into the fires from whence it came. Is there such thing as indestructible magical items in Dungeons & Dragons, and what are the implications of that? Could you hold up an impossibly heavy weight, or use it as a impossible lever, or a pin holding back an impossible force, because this weapon is in fact indestructible, so it can't be snapped or broken or bent? So that's definitely interesting. Could you in fact, shove a magical sword into the ground and stop a door from being opened, because they just can't open it? They just can't bend that sword as it's sunk into some stone. Interesting ideas. You could have something like a magical indestructible piton pin, an iron spike that just never breaks or dulls. Or something like an impossibly sharp pin, which could have all sorts of weird ramifications. So smart monsters and dumb players. Dragons, for instance, are quite smart, and they are very old. So they have tactics which would work 100% of the time for killing an entire party. As a dungeon master, you can probably think of ways that you could very easily kill off the entire party, and a very intelligent monster like a dragon, if it was a dungeon master, would would know these things. That's the whole point of them being geniuses. They've seen all the different parameters. So, for instance, it's in the best interest of a dragon to have hordes of kobolds and things which are firing ranged attacks and missiles and things like that, and casting spells and all sorts of things from all different quarters at the same time at the player characters as they enter the dragon's lair. Meanwhile, the dragon is completely ruthless and will roast its ally kobolds and the held up player characters at the same time. So yeah, and use things such as magical items, because dragons can cast spells, dragons can use magical items, so why don't they? If they have a Vorpal sword in their collection of treasure, they would most certainly be able to use them in combat, which would certainly be a turn up for the books if all of a sudden the dragon lashes out with a claw, rolls a natural 20 and beheads one of the player characters. That would certainly be a turn up for the books at the table, I'm sure. Some slack jaws and wide eyes, but why not? So should you roll up your treasure for your dragon before the combat even happens, instead of rolling the treasure afterwards? Definitely, I would say definitely roll up the treasure beforehand. Not only because it could change the entire course of the fight and give you a lot of inspiration for what these monsters could possibly do with this treasure, but also it's an incentive for the players when they come in that they can see what they have to gain from this fight, and it gives them an incentive to possibly risk everything when things are going very badly for them, for each other. Also, dragons probably have scrolls of resurrection and things like that in their hordes as well. They are intelligent and they have minions that can resurrect them using the same magic that player characters can use, so why wouldn't they? And also they have access to dark powers, evil gods and things. Certainly it's in their best interest to raise dragons from the dead, things like that. You know, you scratch my back, and possibly later on when I have some evil force which is taking over this entire area, I could count you as an ally, and it's very handy to have a dragon as aerial assault specialist and even just reconnaissance. So certainly. In Dungeons and Dragons, the prevalence of people having access to the air, for instance, a spell that can cause you to fly, or riding mounts, or magical carpets and rings of flying and all sorts of different things like that, is quite amazing. And when you think about the ramifications of that would have for a technology that is reasonably commonplace in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. So just for the application of cartography or the retardation of developing flying machines, why would you develop a flying machine which could drop out of the air like a stone if anything goes wrong, when there's magical items and things which are much more reliable? Same sort of thing, the argument that I have for people using black powder weapons, like muskets and revolvers and things like that. First of all, you need a level of manufacturing which has a high degree of repetitive precision. So you need to be able to manufacture the same item over and over and over again with extreme precision, which is difficult unless you have an industrial base in which that sort of manufacturer is coming from. And so that kind of limits you to breech-loaded, muzzle-loaded weapons and things like that, not automatic machine guns and things. Unless you're a wizard who has golems and things that can produce that sort of stuff. But if you've got a golem that can do that sort of thing, why do you need a gun in the first place? You can just have golems firing things at people or hunting people down to the end of the earth, because the golems never tire out and never stop. Using elemental forces as power sources for things. So instead of having a steam engine or cutting down forests to run your blacksmith and things like that, all you need is a wizard that can summon even a relatively minor fire elemental, for instance, and that smithy has got a forge which will run pretty much forever. It's not an ethical thing to do when you think about it, but elementals have a different mindset, so who knows what their thoughts about imprisonment on the prime material plane are anyway. Do they seek vengeance, or do they just sort of forget about it as soon as they get back to where they're from? Who knows? So smart monsters do smart things, but sometimes it pays to be a little bit dumb on the monster's part to give the player characters a fighting chance. So yeah, and that's where the different alignment and personality and the flaws of dragons and other creatures come in. So the megalomania, the overconfidence, the greed and avarice that causes them to do stupid things. So dragons in particular will avoid using a breath weapon which could possibly immolate and destroy all the magical items and precious metals and things like that the characters are carrying, because that's the objective of the monster in the first place. Dragons collect hordes of treasure. It's an obsession of theirs. It doesn't necessarily make any sense. They don't do anything with it other than like having it. It gives them comfort and a sense of accomplishment, and it attracts other dragons to them as like a plumage display. Look at my amazing horde. I'm, come and have my babies. So they seek out and kill off adventurers. Not only that, but there's an active principle as well. I mean, the dragons can sustain themselves perfectly well in the forest, well away from any humanoid settlements and things like that. But they have this desire for treasure and things, and they resent the fact that these humanoids are so good at acquiring and making it. So they both want what the humanoids have, and they hate the humanoids for having it. So they will resent them, and they will kill them, and they will take all their stuff. But it will cause them to do stupid things like not attack with their full force, or moderate the way that they use their breath weapon to not just immolate and melt the player characters as soon as they see them, because that will actually destroy the entire objective. The meat of their bones will be ruined, and all of their magic items will be melted or go up in smoke. Or blasted apart with electrical activity, or shaken to pieces with sonic attacks, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Also, they don't want to do anything that will disappear the characters and lose the magical items that way as well. So they'll preserve the bodies, perhaps, which gives an opportunity for people to be raised from the dead and things like that. So, yeah. Smart monsters, dumb players, but occasionally smart monsters do dumb things. Also, I like to incorporate mini quests inside the encounter zone. And this is things like, if you do this and this, it will stop this element in the environment, which makes it more difficult for your character to do what, to win. So if you turn off this lever and this lever, it will stop the flow of lava, which is powering a furnace, which is blasting plumes of fire and causing puddles of magma to form on the floor, causing difficult terrain that could scorch you, or if you get knocked into it by monsters which can push you back or knock you down. Getting knocked into a puddle of magma is a pretty serious prospect, and so the characters will take into account tactical considerations of the environment itself, and it becomes a mini quest. Do this, you must be over here to do this, which puts you in line of fire of these monsters here. They're expecting you to do it, and they have tactics which they've lined up for when you try. And this simple structure of do this and this to stop this has a million applications, and when you combine that with the different varieties of creatures, always combine different types of creatures in the environment. That's something that I definitely encourage any DM to do, is think of the way that the monster is living there before the player characters get there, and the other monsters in that environment and how they interact with each other. Even in a basic sort of principle like, how does the beholder feel about what's on the floor? Does it have carrion crawlers that it keeps as pets? Because they don't need to worry about what's on the floor, and the carrion crawlers keep everything reasonably clean. Beholders have no sense of smell or taste, so they don't care if their servants are troglodytes and smell awful. They don't know. As far as they're concerned, the troglodytes are fairly useful and simple servants to keep around, and they have a habit of attacking anybody that comes into the room. The player characters may, in fact, want to go in there and stop the toxic mists by opening doors to allow airflow to go through the room, but the doors are locked or barred, or somehow it's complicated, and doing so takes certain members of the party away to do certain things. So, for instance, the fighter, who has the highest amount of strength, who has the best chances breaking through the doors, take them out of the combat, and all of a sudden the ranged attackers and the strikers and things have a lot more difficulty holding off the hordes of troglodytes which are coming at them, and you've got a dragon to worry about maybe, or a beholder. Perhaps the beholder is asleep, so you want to do so quietly. Open up these doors and things and not wake it up by coughing and sneezing or vomiting, because the smell of the troglodytes is so bad. So all of these little subtle things make for a very interesting and unique encounter. So certainly things to encounter. And I do encourage you to keep a little notebook of just weird ideas like that and just jot it down. What if the beholder has gelatinous cubes on the floor, but there's so many of them that the entire floor is just a checker pattern of gelatinous cubes trying to move around, but they can't do it. Or every now and then one of them will rise up as it's trying to crawl over the other gelatinous cubes, but like crabs in a bucket, the other gelatinous cubes trying to crawl up. As soon as something starts to rise up, it grabs hold of it and tries to move up it as well, which keeps them all down. Perhaps the beholder has in fact put a a stone slab on top of all these different on all these different gelatinous cubes or something, or I don't know, some different way it can manipulate environments so that the player characters will be walking across what seems to be flagstones which are moving up and down for some reason, and then every now and then the beholder will aim an eye ray at one of these flagstones and it will disappear, and all of a sudden it's a gelatinous cube that the characters are potentially going to fall into. How do you deal with that sort of thing? That's an interesting idea. So encounter quests, many problems that you have to deal with in the environment itself. And as I say, the encounter area is a monster in and of itself. It has you have the potential to give it actions during the combat round that it takes itself, so which is things that happen. And there's, if a room is on fire, it's a progressive problem that gets worse and worse unless it's dealt with, which adds a sense of urgency to the encounter, which makes it more engaging, which makes the entire experience an engaging one, because every round is a little bit different. It's not just a rather lather, rinse, repeat sort of combat sequence, which can get pretty dull. No matter how spectacular your character's powers are, if they're doing them over and over and over again, they're going to get a little bit tired of that character. So unique terrain types is definitely something which you can incorporate in that. And I like the idea of dimensional shifts and different time aspects or portals which lead from one place to another, so an encounter can actually take place in 3 different dimensions within a certain bounded space. So you could be moving between the dimensions as the combat actually ensues. So you could cross over into the Feywild, into the Shadowfell, back to the material plane, accidentally step into the Feywild again, the portal starts to close. Oh god, I could get stranded in the Feywild, apart, separated from my party because I'm fighting this damn monster which can travel between the planes easily, but I can't. So there's a potential of getting left behind. Do you risk it and engage that creature with an attack which you have to deliver whilst you're in that dimension, or do you wait for it to sit on the other side of that barrier, resting and recovering and drinking healing potions and looking at you through the this idea of that you could incorporate that thing as a challenge, as an environment, and also a threat. And other things could be crawling through these dimensional barriers as well, these portals which shouldn't really exist. Particularly if it's an opening to the plane of the abyss or something, and you can see that demons are starting to take notice that there's a portal, an open portal to the prime material world, and this monster just doesn't care. It's like, yeah, sure. You can fight me, but, if you want to fight me, this portal has to stay open. And the longer it's open, the worse things become for the prime material plane. And also morphic terrain. If you're in limbo and things like that, the environment can change if you have a strong personality. So this represents your wisdom score and your intelligence score kind of being like a strength and dexterity score, where you can manipulate the environment purely mentally. So even creatures without psychic powers can manipulate the environment as if they have telekinesis and the ability to create matter spontaneously out of nothing. The Githzerai do this, and so it's possible in an extremely morphic environment for spellcasters and things like that to manifest conjuration spells without casting spells in these environments, because essentially they already know the mental gymnastics required and the focus required to bring something out of nothing, to rearrange matter to create something, or to manipulate things which are already there, which are psychically attuned to being moved in the first place. And if you have an environment there where there's a dimensional crossover and a morphic property enters into the prime material plane, you can do these sort of things in the prime material plane as well. Imagine going into a wizard's lair where anybody can awaken an object or cause something to fly, or just do an intelligence check in order to control an object which is moving around the environment. So everybody becomes Jedi for a shorter period of time. And that's something which is fun and interesting that you can play with, because it's limited and bounded to that specific location, and the characters can't take anything away from that and carry on using those powers. It's limited to that specific environment, that specific encounter location. So it's an exotic element which is bounded and controllable by the DM, which they can include but easily end at any moment. And because it's weird and the players don't know why it's there in the first place, they'll accept that it just stops suddenly because the DM says so. And I think that's a good point to stop our little conversation for the day. If you like this sort of video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comment section below whether this has inspired any sort of encounter ideas for you. If you like this sort of rambling video, please let me know. I'm certainly happy to make them for you. They're very easy for me to do. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ums and ahs and pauses and stops and things like that because this is just me rambling off the top of my head. Yeah, but thanks for the suggestion and the opportunity to bring you this little speech about just, my inspiring ideas and experience as a DM and things. And I will be back with more videos for you very soon. Be patient with me. I know I'm not putting out as many videos as I normally do. I'm working on it, people. But I have, it's technically difficult while I'm away from home. I'll be back at home again pretty soon and continuing on with the monster series, the demon series, all that sort of stuff. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll catch you again soon.